Did Elvis really record a #1 hit in a single take after turning out all the lights? How did a broom, a metal chair, and a concrete stairwell become crucial instruments on some of his biggest records? What was the secret to the sound that came out of a small, unassuming building in Nashville, a sound that changed music forever? The story of RCA Studio B is not just about a room. It is about a specific time, a specific group of people, and a series of happy accidents that created magic. The secrets are not in the gear alone, but in how it was used and by whom. Number 23. Why was a world-famous studio built so cheaply? The most famous recording studio in Nashville was not designed to be a recording studio at all. You know, it was originally built as a television studio for a local station. The legendary acoustics of the main room were a complete accident, the result of a builder trying to save money. The iconic acoustic panels on the ceiling were not a product of scientific design. They were cheap, mismatched ceiling tiles the builder got for a discount. The story starts not with a grand vision, but with a practical problem. In the mid-1950s, RCA Victor needed a dedicated space in Nashville. Their artists, including Elvis Presley, after his contract was bought from Sun Records, were recording in whatever space they could find. This often meant using the Methodist Television, Radio and Film Commission's studio or other shared facilities. The results were inconsistent. Chet Atkins, the legendary guitarist who is now an executive and producer for RCA's Nashville division, knew they needed their own building. He and engineer Bill Miltenberg lobbied the headquarters in New York for the money. RCA finally agreed, but the budget was tight. They bought a small lot on what would become Music Row. The construction contract went to a man named Dan Maddox. Maddox was a builder, not an acoustic engineer. His primary goal was to get the building up quickly and under budget. The design for the main studio room, Room B, was unusual. It was not a perfect rectangle. The dimensions were 60 feet by 42 feet with a 20-foot ceiling. These non-parallel walls were a stroke of luck. They help to break up standing waves, which are a major problem in recording. Standing waves create spots in a room where certain bass frequencies get louder and others disappear, leading to an uneven sound. The odd shape of Studio B helped to prevent this naturally. The real secret, however, was in the ceiling. Maddox was supposed to install standard acoustic tiles, but he found a much cheaper option, a random assortment of 2-foot by 4-foot ceiling panels. They were all different thicknesses and densities. He installed them at varying heights. This created a completely random, diffuse surface. Instead of sound bouncing off the ceiling in a predictable way, it was scattered in countless directions. This diffusion created a smooth, natural-sounding room ambiance without any harsh echoes or dead spots. It was an acoustic masterpiece born from frugality. The engineers who later worked there called these random panels Maddox's folly, but it was a folly that worked perfectly. The floor was concrete, covered with simple asphalt tiles. This hard surface provided a bright, reflective sound, which balanced the diffusion from the ceiling. The combination of the odd-shaped walls, the cheap, mismatched ceiling tiles, and the hard floor created the unique sonic signature of Studio B. It was a sound that was alive and present, but also controlled. It was a happy accident. No one could have designed it to be that way on purpose, because the science of acoustics at the time was not that advanced. They stumbled into perfection. The building itself, finished in 1957, was unremarkable from the outside. A low one-story brick building. But inside, the accidental physics of the room were waiting for the right artist and the right musicians to bring it to life. Number 22, how did a blatant mistake make a song immortal? The master take of Are You Lonesome Tonight that sold millions of copies contains a clear, audible mistake. Near the end of the song, during the spoken word part, you can hear a distinct thump. That was the sound of Elvis bumping his head on the microphone. Immediately after, you can hear the Jordanaires, his backing vocalist, trying to stifle a laugh. Elvis himself sounds like he is about to break into laughter as he finishes the line. They kept it all. The session took place on April 4th, 1960. It was a late night affair, which was typical for Elvis. He worked best after midnight, when the world was quiet and the creative energy was high. He had just returned from his 2-year stint in the Army and was under immense pressure to prove he was still relevant. RCA and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, were booking these sessions to get a new album and a string of singles ready. The song Are You Lonesome Tonight was not Elvis's idea. It was an old ballad from the 1920s. Colonel Parker suggested it because it was a favorite of his wife, Marie. Elvis was not enthusiastic. He thought the song was old-fashioned and corny. The session musicians, the elite Nashville A-team, had been working for hours. They were tired. They ran through the song a few times, but nothing was clicking. Elvis was frustrated. He felt he could not get the right feeling for the song. The producer, Steve Scholes, and the engineer, Bill Porter, were about to give up and move on to the next tune. And then Elvis had an idea. He told Bill Porter to kill the main studio lights. He wanted to record in near total darkness, with just a small light on his lyric sheet. He felt this would help him capture the lonely, intimate mood of the song. The musicians were in the dark too, relying on muscle memory and feel. The Jordanaires were gathered around a separate microphone nearby. They started the take. The atmosphere was completely different. The darkness focused everyone's energy. Elvis's vocal was gentle, vulnerable, and incredibly personal. The musicians played with a delicate touch. It was magic. They got to the spoken word section. Elvis, completely lost in the performance, leaned in too close to the microphone, and his head bumped the stand. The thump echoed through the studio monitors. In the control room, Porter and Scholes winced. A perfect take, ruined at the last second. But then they listened back. The mistake was there, but so was the magic. The little thump, the suppressed laughter, it did not ruin the song. It made it human. It was as if you were in the room with him, sharing a private, imperfect moment. Elvis himself listened to the playback and, despite the error, loved the feel of the performance. He agreed with Scholes and Porter. That was the one. They decided not to edit it out. It was a bold choice. In an era of polished, perfect recordings, they chose to release a take with a flaw. That flaw became one of the most endearing parts of the record. It was a secret moment of vulnerability that connected with millions of listeners. Number 21, who was actually in charge of the music? Chet Atkins was the head of RCA Nashville and a producer on paper. Steve Scholes was the official RCA executive who had signed Elvis. But in RCA Studio B, neither of them was truly in charge. Elvis Presley was the real producer. He chose the songs, dictated the arrangements, and directed the world-class musicians. He just did not get the credit. This created a quiet tension during the sessions. Chet Atkins was a brilliant musician and producer in his own right. Smoother, more pop-oriented style of, country music. He liked his sessions to be organized and efficient. Musicians would come in, read their chord charts, play their parts, and be done. Elvis worked the complete opposite way. An Elvis session was a creative chaos. It would often start late at night. Elvis would arrive with his entourage, the Memphis Mafia. They would spend hours just hanging out, talking, and listening to records. Elvis needed to create a relaxed, comfortable vibe before he could even think about singing. When he was ready, he would often start not with the scheduled songs, but with old gospel tunes. He and the Jordanaires would gather around the piano, played by Floyd Kramer, and sing spirituals for an hour or more. This was not just a warm-up, it was how Elvis centered himself and connected with the musicians on a deeper level. It set the spiritual and emotional tone for the whole session. When it came time to record a song, there was often no written arrangement. Elvis would play a demo record or sing the melody himself. He would then tell the musicians what he wanted, but not in technical terms. He could not read music. He communicated in terms of feeling. He might tell the drummer, DJ Fontana, "Don't play so busy, just give me a straight back beat." He might ask the bassist Bob Moore to play a walking line like he had heard on an old R&B record. He would sing the guitar parts he wanted to Scotty Moore or Hank Garland. The Nashville team were masters of this process. They were so skilled that they could interpret Elvis's vague instructions and turn them into perfect musical parts on the spot. Or Floyd Kramer on piano, Boots Randolph on saxophone, Buddy Harman on drums. These were not just hired hands. They were collaborators. Elvis would try different tempos, different keys, and different grooves until he found the one that felt right. This could take hours. A song might be recorded 30 times before Elvis was satisfied. Chet Atkins sometimes found this process frustrating. It was inefficient and expensive, but he was smart enough to recognize Elvis's genius. He would often stay in the control room, quietly observing, but he learned to let Elvis run the show. Steve Schultz, too, deferred to Elvis's instincts. He knew that the magic of an Elvis record came from Elvis himself, not from a producer's formula. So while the record labels listed others as producers, the musicians in the room knew the truth. Elvis was the conductor, the arranger, and the ultimate creative force behind his greatest hits. Number 20, how did a children's folk song become a global hit? One of Elvis's most charming and unusual hits from the Studio B era, Wooden Heart, was not an original rock and roll song. It was based on a German folk song called Muss Iden. The idea to record it came from Elvis's time stationed in Germany with the U.S. Army. The song features a German language verse, a children's nursery rhyme feel, and an accordion, an instrument rarely heard on a pop record at the time. The session for the soundtrack of the film, I Blues, took place in April 1960. This was one of the first big projects after his Army discharge. The movie was meant to capitalize on his military service. The songwriters were tasked with creating songs that fit the European setting. When Wooden Heart was presented, it was a novelty. It was simple, almost goofy. The rhythm was a polka like oompa beat. Elvis, however, saw the potential in it. He remembered hearing folk music like this in Germany and knew it had a genuine, heartfelt quality. In the studio, the Nashville team had to adapt to this strange new style. The producer on the session, a young man named Joseph Lilly, brought in an accordion player to give it an authentic sound. This was a departure for musicians used to playing country, rock, and pop. The recording process was playful. Elvis was in a good mood. He had fun with the German lyrics, working to get the pronunciation right. The inclusion of the German verse was a key part of its appeal. For American audiences, it was exotic and interesting. For European audiences, particularly in Germany, it was a respectful nod to their culture from the biggest star in the world. The arrangement was deceptively simple. The prominent beat was not just from the drums. To get a unique percussive sound, they used what they had in the studio. Bill Porter, the engineer, mic'd a wooden chair. Drummer DJ Fontana or Buddy Harman would tap out the beat on the chair, giving the track a light, woody thump that fit the song's title. This kind of improvisation was common at Studio B. They were not afraid to experiment to find the right sound. When the song was released, it was a massive hit, but not initially in the United States. RCA chose not to release it as a single in America, thinking it was too much of a novelty. They released It's Now or Never instead, but Wooden Heart topped the charts in the United Kingdom, Germany, and many other countries. It sold millions of copies overseas. Eventually, due to popular demand from imported copies, RCA released it as a B-side in the US in 1961. Even then, it became a hit. It was proof that a simple folk song filtered through Elvis's charisma and the creative environment of Studio B could conquer the world. Number 19, why was the studio's famous piano almost always out of tune? The piano that graced countless hit records from Studio B, a 1942 Steinway Model B, was notoriously difficult to keep in tune. It was not because of neglect. It was a side effect of the studio's constant use and the creative process of the musicians, especially the legendary pianist Floyd Kramer. The piano's slightly imperfect tuning became part of the studio's signature sound. The piano was installed when the studio opened, and it quickly became the preferred instrument of Floyd Kramer, the A-Team's primary keyboardist. Kramer had a unique style. He developed a technique called slip note playing. Instead of hitting a note cleanly, he would first strike the adjacent note below it, then quickly slide up to the correct note. This created a bent, crying sound that was incredibly expressive. You can hear it clearly on songs like Patsy Cline's Crazy and Elvis's Are You Lonesome Tonight? This slip note style was hard on the piano. The constant hammering of two keys at once, with one being released immediately, put a lot of stress on the piano's action and strings. Furthermore, the sessions at Studio B were long. They could go for 12 hours or more. under hot studio lights. The temperature fluctuations in the room caused the wooden frame and the metal strings of the piano to expand and contract at different rates. This constant change would pull the strings slightly out of tune over the course of a session. They would have a piano tuner come in regularly. But by the middle of a long, late-night Elvis session, the piano would inevitably drift. The engineers and producers could have stopped the session to retune it, but that would have killed the creative momentum. The vibe, the feeling in the room was always more important than technical perfection. So they often just kept playing. This resulted in a sound that was subtly different from the perfectly tuned pianos on other records. The Studio B piano had character. It was a little warmer, a little more human. Its slight imperfections blended with the guitars and voices in a pleasing way. It was part of the feel that made those records so special. When you listen closely to those classic recordings, you can hear it. It is not jarringly out of tune, but it has a lived-in, organic quality that a perfectly tuned digital piano could never replicate. The sound of that piano is the sound of creativity happening in real time, imperfections and all. It is another example of how the happy accidents and practical realities of Studio B contributed to its legendary sound. Number 18, how did a concrete stairwell create $1 million sound? One of the most defining features of the Elvis records made at Studio B was their rich, spacious echo. This was not created with expensive electronic equipment. It was created in a concrete block stairwell at the back of the building. This natural echo chamber was discovered by accident and became one of the studio's most important secret weapons. When the studio was first built, the engineer Bill Miltenberg tried to create a dedicated echo chamber in a small, specially designed room. But it sounded terrible. The echoes were harsh and metallic. For the first couple of years, they had to rely on the echo chamber at another local studio, Kane, piping the sound over a telephone line. This was inconvenient, and the quality was not always great. In 1960, a brilliant young engineer named Bill Porter took over as the chief engineer at Studio B. Porter was a perfectionist with a great ear. He hated the sound of the existing echo chamber and the hassle of using the telephone line. He started searching for a better solution within the building itself. One day, he was walking around and noticed the acoustics in a service corridor that led to a concrete stairwell. The space was about 8 feet by 15 feet. He clapped his hands and was amazed by the sound. It was a smooth, natural reverberation that decayed perfectly. He knew he had found something special. He had a speaker installed at the bottom of the stairwell and a high-quality RCA 44 microphone at the top. The setup was simple. During a recording session, he could send a signal from a vocal or an instrument out of the control room down to the speaker in the stairwell. The sound would fill the space, and the microphone at the top would pick up the natural reverberation. This signal would then be sent back to the control room, where Porter could blend it with the original dry signal. The sound was magical. It was warm, dense, and had a depth that artificial echo units of the time could not match. You can hear this echo all over Elvis's post-Army hits. It is the lush atmosphere surrounding his voice on It's Now or Never. It is the ghostly trail on the piano in Are You Lonesome Tonight? Porter could control the amount of echo by how much signal he sent to the stairwell speaker and how much of the return signal he mixed back in. He could even change the quality of the echo by moving the microphone around in the stairwell. This discovery transformed the sound of the records coming out of Nashville. It was a key component of the Nashville sound. Other studios had echo chambers, but none sounded quite like the stairwell at Studio B. It was another case of an accidental feature of the building's design being turned into a priceless creative tool. It cost next to nothing to set up, but it added $1 million polish to every record it touched. Number 17, who were the anonymous musicians on all the hits? Elvis Presley's name was on the record, but the sound of his greatest Nashville hits was crafted by a small, tight-knit group of studio musicians known as the Nashville A-Team. These players were so good, so versatile, and so intuitive that they could walk into a session with no sheet music and create a hit record in a matter of hours. They were the unsung heroes of Studio B. This group was not a formal band. It was a loose collective of the best session players in town. The core members on many of Elvis's sessions included Floyd Kramer on piano, Bob Moore or Junior Husky on upright bass, DJ Fontana and Buddy Harman on drums, Scotty Moore and Hank Garland on electric guitar, and the Jordanaires on background vocals. Later, Boots Randolph on saxophone and Charlie McCoy on harmonica would become key contributors. What made the A-Team so special was their combination of technical skill and creative instinct. They could play any style of music, rock and roll, country, pop, gospel. R&B Elvis would come into a session with just a rough idea for a song. He would sing a melody or describe a feeling he wanted. The A-Team would then build the entire arrangement around him on the spot. Floyd Kramer's slip note piano style became a signature sound. Hank Garland, a jazz guitar prodigy, brought a level of sophistication to his solos and fills that was unheard of in rock and roll at the time. Bob Moore's bass lines were the solid melodic foundation for everything. Buddy Harman was a master of rhythm, able to create the perfect feel for any song, from a hard driving rocker to a gentle ballad. They worked by a system of numbers, not notes. A musician would create a simple chord chart based on the Nashville number system, where numbers correspond to chords in a given key. This allowed them to change keys easily to suit Elvis's voice. A song might be charted as 1 to 4, 5 to 1, and they would all instantly know what to play, no matter if the song was in the key of C, G, or A. Their chemistry was undeniable. They had played together on hundreds of sessions for other artists like Patsy Cline, Brenda Lee, and Roy Orbison. They knew each other's playing inside and out. They could anticipate each other's moves. This is why they could work so quickly and intuitively. When Elvis started singing, they would fall in right behind him, creating a bed of sound that was both supportive and inspiring. They were paid a standard session fee, usually a little over $40 per 3-hour session. They received no royalties. Their names rarely appeared on the albums, but without their creativity, their skill, and their unique chemistry, the classic Elvis hits from Studio B would not sound the way they do. They were the engine room of the Nashville music machine. Number 16, why did Elvis prefer to record in the dark? Many of Elvis's most iconic and emotional vocal performances at Studio B were recorded in complete or near total darkness. This was not a gimmick, it was a technique. Elvis used to shut out distractions, focus his mind, and tap into the deepest feelings of a song. The dim, moody lighting of Studio B became an essential part of his creative process. The studio was designed with flexible lighting. It had bright fluorescent lights for general work and setup, but it also had a system of colored mood lights. There were blue lights, red lights, and dim spotlights. The engineer, Bill Porter, realized early on that the atmosphere of the room had a huge impact on the music. He became a master of using light to create a specific vibe. Elvis thrived in this environment. He was, by this point in his career, one of the most famous people on the planet. He lived in a constant spotlight. The studio was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of fame. Recording late at night, when the rest of the city was asleep, was part of that. Dimming the lights was the final step. It created a private, intimate world for him and the musicians. For emotional ballads, the effect was profound. The session for Are You Lonesome Tonight is the most famous example. By turning off all the main lights, Elvis was able to block out everything but the words and the melody. He was no longer performing for a microphone or for the producer in the control room. He was singing to himself, living the story of the song. The result was a vocal performance of incredible vulnerability and sincerity. He used this technique on other songs as well. For a gospel song, he might ask for a soft blue light, creating a spiritual, church-like atmosphere. For an upbeat rock and roll number, the lights might be brighter to generate more energy. He understood intuitively that the visual environment was connected to the emotional output. This practice also helped the musicians. In the dim light, they had to rely more on listening and less on watching. It forced them to connect with the music on a deeper level. They had to feel the groove rather than just read it off a chart. It enhanced the chemistry of the A-Team, making them play as a single, cohesive unit. The control that Elvis and Bill Porter exercised over the studio's lighting was a secret ingredient in the success of the records. It shows that making a great record is about more than just notes and rhythms. It is about creating a space where an artist feels safe enough to be vulnerable and free enough to create something real. In the darkness of Studio B, Elvis found the light for some of his greatest performances. Number 15. What was the magic the 10th on the studio floor? In the main room of Studio B, there is a small X marked on the floor with tape. This was the exact spot where Elvis Presley stood to record his vocals. It was not a random location. It was the acoustic sweet spot of the room, a precise point where the singer's voice, the room's natural reverberation, and the microphone all came together in perfect harmony. Finding this spot was the work of engineer Bill Porter. When he took over in 1960, he spent a lot of time experimenting with the acoustics of the room. He walked around the studio, clapping his hands, snapping his fingers, and listening to how the sound bounced off the walls and the ceiling. He noticed that in one particular area, about in the center of the room, the sound was different. It was clearer, fuller, and had a pleasing natural resonance without any harsh reflections. This was the spot where the complex sound waves in the room converged in the most balanced way. It was the place where the accidental genius of the room's construction, the non-parallel walls, and the diffuse ceiling paid off the most. Porter knew this was where the lead vocalist had to stand. He marked it with an X. For a recording session, Porter would place the vocal microphone, usually a Neumann U47, right over this X. He would then position Elvis on the mark. From this spot, the microphone would not just pick up Elvis's voice directly. It would also capture a perfect blend of the sound reflecting off the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. This gave the vocal a natural richness and depth before any artificial echo was even added. It made the voice sound like it was in a real physical space, not a dead, sterile studio. The musicians were then arranged around Elvis and the X. The piano, bass, and drums were positioned in their own sweet spots, carefully placed by Porter to achieve the best sound and minimize bleed between the microphones. But the X was the focal point. It was the center of the sonic universe, and Studio B. Elvis understood the importance of this. He was a very physical performer. Even in the studio, he would move around as he sang, but he learned to work the microphone and stay close to the Magic X. It became his home base during the sessions. This precise positioning was a key technical secret to the clarity and presence of Elvis's vocals on the records made during this period. It was a simple piece of tape on the floor, but it marked the intersection of science, architecture, and art. Number 14, how did gospel music fuel rock and roll hits? Nearly every single recording session Elvis held at Studio B began the same way, with a gospel jam. Before they even thought about recording the pop and rock and roll songs scheduled for the session, Elvis and the Jordanaires would gather around the piano. For an hour, sometimes longer, they would sing the spirituals and gospel hymns they had all grown up with. This was not a waste of expensive studio time. It was the essential ritual that unlocked the magic. Elvis's love for gospel music was deep and genuine. It was the first music he had ever sung, and it remained his favorite genre throughout his life. Singing these songs was more than a vocal warm-up for him. It was a way to center himself spiritually and emotionally. The music connected him to his roots, to his faith, and to the very core of his musical being. The impact of these gospel warm-ups on the sessions was immense. First, it set the mood. The powerful harmonies and heartfelt lyrics created a warm, soulful atmosphere in the studio. It washed away the pressures and distractions of the outside world and focused everyone on the pure joy of making music. It was a communal act of creation that bonded Elvis, the Jordanaires, and the A-Team musicians together before the official recording even started. Second, it energized Elvis. The passion and intensity of gospel music would fire up his voice and his spirit. After singing a powerful hymn like How Great Thou Art, or a joyful jubilee like Swing Down Sweet Chariot, he would be ready to tackle anything. This energy carried over directly into the rock and roll songs. You can hear the gospel fervor in his delivery on songs like Surrender and Crying in the Chapel. He sang pop songs with the conviction of a preacher. Third, It influenced the arrangements, the call and response patterns, the soaring harmonies, and the rhythmic feel of gospel music bled into the secular recordings. The Jordanaires, a premier gospel quartet, brought their signature sound to everything they did. Their oohs and ahs were not just background filler, they were an integral part of the arrangement, providing a lush, angelic cushion for Elvis's lead vocal. Producers like Chet Atkins and Steve Scholes understood the importance of this ritual. They knew that if they let Elvis start with his gospel music, they would get much better performances from him later in the session. So they would let the clock run, paying the high-priced musicians to essentially jam because they knew it was the secret ingredient. The fire of Saturday night rock and roll, born in Studio B, was almost always kindled by the spirit of Sunday morning gospel. Number 13, could Elvis even read a single note of music? Elvis Presley, one of the most successful and influential musicians of the 20th century, could not read music. He never learned. He also had no formal training in music theory. He played guitar and piano, but entirely by ear. This lack of formal training was not a handicap. It was central to his genius and his unique way of making records at Studio B. Because he could not read or write musical charts, Elvis had to communicate his ideas to the highly trained musicians of the A-Team in a different way. He worked purely on instinct and feeling. His process was organic and collaborative. He would listen to a demo of a new song, often a simple recording with just the guitar and vocal. He would absorb the melody and the lyrics until he had internalized them. Then in the studio, he would become the conductor of a symphony he could only hear in his head. He would stand in the middle of the room and sing the song, showing the band the tempo and the groove he wanted. He might turn to the bassist, Bob Moore, and say, "Play a line that walks up and down, something that really moves." He would hum a guitar lick to Scotty Moore or Hank Garland. He would tap out a rhythm on a chair for the drummer. The team musicians were brilliant translators. They could take Elvis's non-technical, feeling-based instructions and turn them into sophisticated musical parts. This process was far more creative than simply having musicians read notes off a page. It was a conversation, and Elvis would present an idea, the band would interpret it, and then he would react. They would build the arrangement together, take by take. This method is why his records from this era sound so alive and spontaneous. They were not pre-planned to the last detail. They were created in the moment. If something was not working, Elvis would stop and try it a different way. A slow ballad might become an upbeat rocker. A simple country song might get a Latin-influenced rhythm. He was searching for a specific feeling, a chill, as he sometimes called it. He would keep experimenting until he felt that chill, and then he knew they had it. His phenomenal musical ear was his greatest asset. He could hear every part in the arrangement. He could detect a single wrong note from the piano or a slightly out-of-tune guitar. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of music, from blues and country to opera and pop. He would draw on all these influences in the studio, blending them together in new and exciting ways. His inability to read music forced him to be a more intuitive, more hands-on, and ultimately more creative leader in the studio. He was producing music from the heart, not from a textbook. Number 12, what happened when a rockabilly pioneer met a jazz prodigy. The guitar sound on Elvis's early 1960s records was a unique blend of two very different but equally brilliant players, Scotty Moore and Hank Sugarfoot Garland. Scotty Moore was Elvis's original guitarist, a rockabilly pioneer whose simple, tasty licks had defined the Sun Records sound. Hank Garland was a Nashville session prodigy, a sophisticated jazz guitarist with mind-boggling technique. Their pairing in Studio B created a guitar dynamic that was both groundbreaking and perfectly suited to Elvis's evolving style. Scotty Moore had been with Elvis from the very beginning. His clean, echo-laden guitar lines on songs like Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog were a fundamental part of early rock and roll. But by 1960, music was changing. The raw, stripped-down sound of the 50s was giving way to a more polished, pop-oriented production style. Elvis's music was evolving with it. Enter Hank Garland. He was a legend among Nashville musicians. He could play anything, but his true love was jazz. He had a deep understanding of complex chords and harmony that was rare in the world of country and rock. When Elvis returned from the Army, Chet Atkins started bringing Garland into the sessions to supplement Scotty Moore's playing. Initially, this could have been an awkward situation, but the two guitarists developed a fantastic working relationship. They did not compete. They complemented each other. Scotty Moore would often lay down the solid rhythmic foundation and the core rock and roll riffs. He was the anchor providing the essential Elvis feel. Hank Garland would then weave his magic around it. He would add sophisticated chord voicings, fluid jazz inflected fills, and lightning fast solos. A perfect example is the song Little Sister. Scotty Moore plays the iconic, gritty, repeated riff that drives the song. It is pure rockabilly attitude. But the blistering, complex guitar solo in the middle of the song, that is all Hank Garland. The combination of Moore's raw power and Garland's refined virtuosity was stunning. On ballads like It's Now or Never, Garland would use his jazz knowledge to create beautiful flowing lines that added a layer of elegance to the track. On a song like Stuck on You, you can hear the interplay between the two. Moore is playing the solid, dependable part, while Garland adds the little flourishes and fills that make the track sparkle. This two-guitar attack gave Elvis's music a new depth and versatility. It could be raw and bluesy one moment, and slick and polished the next. The combination of the rockabilly pioneer and the jazz prodigy in Studio B was a short-lived but magical partnership that helped define the sound of Elvis's triumphant return to music. Number 11. Why did they need a revolutionary new machine to record? The rich, detailed sound of the post-Army Elvis records was made possible by a brand new piece of technology installed at Studio B in 1958, a 3-track reel-to-reel tape recorder. This machine, custom, built by Ampex, was cutting edge for its time and gave the engineers a level of creative control that was previously impossible. It fundamentally changed how records were made. Prior to the 3-track machine, most recordings were made in mono, directly to a single track. This meant that the entire performance, all the instruments and all the vocals had to be perfectly balanced in real time as it was being recorded. The engineer would mix the sound from, all the microphones down to one channel. Once it was on tape, the mix was set in stone. If the guitar was too loud or the vocal was too quiet, you had to do the entire take over again. Some studios had started using 2-track machines, which offered a slight improvement, but the 3-track was a major leap forward. Engineer Bill Porter became a master of this new technology. He developed a system for using the 3 tracks that became the standard for the Nashville sound. He would typically record the rhythm section, bass, drums, and rhythm guitar on track 1. On track 2, he would record the lead vocals and any background vocals. On track 3, he would put the lead instruments and any overdubs like a guitar solo or a string section. This separation gave him incredible flexibility after the performance was finished. During the final mix-down process where the 3 tracks were combined into a mono or stereo master, he could adjust the volume and tone of each track independently. If Elvis's vocal needed to be a little louder, he could just turn up track 2. If the drums were overpowering the other instruments, he could pull back track 1. He could add echo to the vocal track without making the instruments sound muddy. This technique, known as multi-track recording, is the basis of all modern recording. But in 1960, it was revolutionary. It allowed for a much clearer, more polished sound. Each element of the recording could be given its own space in the mix. You can hear the difference clearly when you compare Elvis's Sun recordings with his Studio B recordings. The Sun records are raw, exciting, and sound like a band playing live in a room. The Studio B records are widescreen, high-fidelity productions with every element perfectly placed. The 3-track machine also allowed for overdubbing. While Elvis preferred to record live with the band, sometimes they would add extra parts later. A string section, for example, could be added on the third track after the main performance was captured. This layering of sounds was essential to creating the lush, orchestral pop hits like Surrender. The three-track recorder was not just a piece of hardware, it was a creative tool that enabled the sonic ambitions of Elvis and his production team. Number 10, what did a late-night pizza order have to do with the final take? The atmosphere of an Elvis session at Studio B was just as important as the microphones and the musicians. It was a comfortable, informal, and often playful environment. Elvis knew that great music came from a place of relaxation and camaraderie, not sterile professionalism. This vibe was deliberately cultivated through late night hours, an abundance of food and drink, and a sense of fun that permeated the studio. And Elvis was a night owl. His creative peak was in the small hours of the morning. Sessions would typically start around 6 or 8 p.m., but would not really get going until after 10 p.m. They would often last until sunrise. This created a secluded, intimate world inside the studio, shut off from the rest of Nashville. To keep the energy up, there was always food. Elvis would have his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, make runs for hamburgers, chili dogs, and cases of Pepsi and RC Cola. Pizza orders were common. This was not just about feeding everyone, it was about creating a social, party-like atmosphere. The musicians were not just employees, they were guests. Taking a break for a slice of pizza could reset the mood, ease any tension, and give everyone a chance to just hang out and talk. Sometimes, the best musical ideas would come out of these informal moments. Pranks and jokes were also a big part of the sessions. Elvis had a mischievous sense of humor. He might rig up a bucket of water over a doorway or engage in a water pistol fight. One famous story involves him and his cousin setting off a string of firecrackers in the studio during a playback, terrifying the record executives who were visiting from New York. This might sound unprofessional, but it served a purpose. It kept things loose. It prevented the pressure of making a hit record from stifling the creativity. This relaxed environment was crucial for the A-Team musicians. It allowed them to experiment and take chances without fear of making a mistake. It fostered the kind of intuitive communication that made their on-the-spot arrangements possible. It was also essential for Elvis. He felt comfortable enough to be himself, to be vulnerable on a ballad or playful on a rocker. The sound of an Elvis record is not just the sound of musicians playing their parts. It is the sound of a specific group of people enjoying each other's company and creating something together. The laughter, the camaraderie, the shared pizza, these were all invisible instruments in the orchestra. They were part of the feel that you cannot notate on a piece of sheet music, but can hear in every groove of the final record. Number 9, how did an old Italian song become an American anthem? One of Elvis's biggest and most dramatic hits, It's Now or Never, was based on a classic Italian art song, O Sole Mio. The idea to adapt this Neapolitan standard came to Elvis while he was in the army in Germany. He heard another American singer, Tony Martin, perform an English-language version called There's No Tomorrow, and was captivated by the powerful melody. He knew he had to record his own version. When he returned to the States and began his sessions at Studio B in April 1960, this was one of the first songs on his list. The challenge was that the Tony Martin version was still under copyright. Elvis could not just record it. He needed new lyrics. RCA contacted the songwriting duo Aaron Schroeder and Wally Gold and gave them an urgent assignment: write new words for O Sole Mio for Elvis to record and do it overnight. Schroeder and Gold worked through the night and came up with It's Now or Never. The new lyrics were a perfect fit for Elvis, a passionate declaration of love that matched the dramatic sweep of the melody. In the studio, this song was a major departure from Elvis's rock and roll roots. This was not a blues-based shuffle. It was a grand operatic ballad. The Nashville team had to rise to the occasion. Floyd Cramer played a stately piano part with a slight Latin feel. The rhythm section provided a bolero-like beat. The Jordanaires' backing vocals were lush and almost classical in their arrangement. But the real star was Elvis's voice. He had been taking vocal lessons and working on extending his range. He saw this song as a chance to prove to the world that he was more than just a rock and roll shouter. He was a true vocalist. He delivered the performance with a power and control that shocked everyone in the studio. The climax of the song is the final note, a soaring high G. This was at the very top of his tenor range. Bill Porter, the engineer, remembered the tension in the control room as Elvis went for that note. On the final take, he nailed it perfectly, holding it with incredible power. When he was done, the musicians in the studio burst into spontaneous applause. They knew they had just witnessed something special. RCA knew it too. They rushed the song out as a single. It was an instant massive success. It went to #1 in countries all over the world and became one of the best-selling singles of all time. It redefined Elvis's image, transforming him from a teen idol into a sophisticated adult performer. And it all started with an old Italian song that a young GI had heard on a jukebox in Germany. Number 8 was Colonel Parker ever actually inside the studio? Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's legendary and controversial manager, was the most powerful person in Elvis's career. He controlled the business deals, the movie contracts, and the public image. But when it came to the creative process of making music, he was almost never there. The Colonel rarely, if ever, set foot inside RCA Studio B during a recording session. His influence, however, was still felt. The Colonel's absence was partly by design. He was a manager, a promoter, a businessman. He was not a musician or a producer. He famously said, "My boy's the singer, I'm the promoter." He understood that his area of expertise was selling the product, not creating it. He trusted Elvis and the team at RCA, led by Steve Scholz, to handle the music. He knew that his presence in the studio could be intimidating and might interfere with the creative flow. His distance also served another purpose. It allowed him to maintain a level of separation from the art, treating it purely as a commodity. His main concern was making sure the sessions produced enough songs to fill an album or a movie soundtrack on schedule and on budget. He would communicate with Steve Scholz about the number of tracks needed and the deadlines. This business pressure was always looming over the sessions, even if the Colonel himself was not physically present. However, the Colonel did occasionally influence the song selection from afar. The most famous example is Are You Lonesome Tonight? As mentioned earlier, this was his wife's favorite song, and he strongly encouraged Elvis to record it. He also had a say in what would be released as a single. He had a keen, if sometimes conservative, sense of what would sell. He would listen to the finished recordings and, along with RCA executives, make the final decisions. His primary focus during the Studio B years was on the movie soundtracks. He had negotiated a lucrative series of film contracts for Elvis. This meant that many of the Nashville sessions were not for creating standalone albums of great music, but for churning out songs to fit the plots of lighthearted musical comedies. This became a source of great frustration for Elvis and the musicians later in the 60s. They were forced to record mediocre material because the Colonel had signed a contract. So, while you would not see him in the control room, the Colonel's shadow was always there. He was the man pulling the strings from behind the curtain, the ultimate arbiter of what the public would be allowed to hear. His absence from the creative process protected the magic in the room, but his presence in the business dealings shaped the direction of Elvis's career for better and for worse. Number 7, what made the German microphones so special? The vocal sound on the classic Elvis recordings from Studio B is legendary for its warmth, clarity, and presence. A huge part of that sound came from one specific piece of equipment, the Neumann U47 microphone. This German-made microphone was, and still is, considered one of the greatest vocal mics ever made. At Studio B, it was the key to capturing the magic of Elvis's voice. The U47 was a large diaphragm condenser microphone. Without getting too technical, this means it was incredibly sensitive. It could pick up the most subtle nuances of a singer's performance, the softest whisper, the slightest breath, the richest low tones. It had a unique sound character. It had a gentle boost. in the upper mid-range frequencies, which helped a voice cut through a mix of instruments without sounding harsh. It also had a rich, full-bodied low end, which gave vocals a sense of authority and warmth. Bill Porter, the studio's chief engineer, was a master of using the U-47. He understood that it was not just a tool for capturing sound, it was an instrument in itself. He would position the microphone on the magic X in the center of the room to get the perfect blend of direct sound from Elvis and the natural ambiance of the studio. He also knew how to use a phenomenon called the proximity effect. With a microphone like the U-47, the closer a singer gets to it, the more the bass frequencies are boosted. Elvis learned to use this to his advantage. He would move closer to the mic for intimate, quiet passages to make his voice sound deep and resonant. And he would back off a little for louder, more powerful notes to prevent distortion and keep the sound balanced. This technique, known as working the mic, added another layer of dynamics and emotion to his performances. Studio B had a collection of other great microphones for the instruments like the RCA 44 and 77 ribbon mics, which were great for capturing the sound of guitars and horns. But the U-47 was reserved for the most important instrument of all, the lead vocal. It was a perfect match for Elvis's voice. The mic was able to capture both the raw power of his rock and roll delivery and the gentle vulnerability of his ballad singing. When you hear Elvis's voice on Stuck on You or Surrender, you are hearing a combination of a once-in-a-generation talent and a masterpiece of German engineering brought together by a skilled engineer in a perfectly tuned room. Number 6. How did a throwaway joke song become a classic? The song Little Sister is one of Elvis's toughest, bluesiest rockers from his Studio B period, but it started life as a much lighter, almost novelty song. Its transformation in the studio is a perfect example of how Elvis and the A-Team could take a simple piece of material and mold it into something powerful and unique. The song was written by the legendary songwriting team of Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann. They wrote many hits for Elvis, including Viva Las Vegas and Suspicion. When they first wrote Little Sister, they envisioned it as a fun, bouncy tune. The demo they sent to Elvis was upbeat and had a bit of a calypso feel. The recording session took place on June 26, 1961. When Elvis and the band started working on the song, it was not clicking. They tried it the way it was written, but it felt too lightweight, too pop. Elvis wanted something with more grit, more attitude. He started playing around with the feel. He asked the band to slow it down a little and give it a heavier backbeat. Then guitarist Hank Garland, or possibly Scotty Moore, started playing a simple, catchy, and menacing guitar riff. And groups that rippied figure that instantly changed the period, that instantly changed the entire character of the song. Elvis locked into this new groove. His vocal performance became a sneering, confident taunt. He was no longer just singing a cute pop song, he was delivering a blues-drenched warning. The little sister in the song was no longer just a girl's younger sibling. She was a symbol of forbidden fruit. The arrangement was built around that central riff. Bob Moore played a slinky, prowling bass line. The drums laid down a simple, powerful beat. The Jordanaires provided tight, punchy background vocals that punctuated Elvis's lines. The session came alive. They captured the master take quickly once they had found this new direction. This was the magic of the Studio B process. A song was not a fixed entity. It was a starting point. Elvis and the musicians were not afraid to tear a song apart and rebuild it from the ground up until it felt right. They transformed a lighthearted pop tune into a classic piece of rock and roll, all in the space of a few hours. The final record was a testament to their collective creative instincts and their ability to find the soul of a song. Number 5, who was the quiet genius in the control room? While Elvis was the star on the studio floor, the man responsible for capturing the sound and turning it into a hit record was the engineer in the control room, Bill Porter. From 1960 to 1964, Porter engineered almost all of Elvis's sessions at Studio B. He was a technical wizard with the ears of an artist. His innovations and his meticulous attention to detail were as crucial to the Nashville sound as any of the musicians. Porter was a perfectionist. Before he took over at Studio B, the studio's technical setup was not great. He completely rewired the control room, optimized the equipment, and solved long-standing acoustic problems. His discovery and implementation of the stairwell echo chamber was a game changer. His methodical testing of the main room to find the magic X for vocals was another. During a session, Porter was a calm, focused presence. While the atmosphere on the studio floor could be loose and chaotic, the control room was a place of intense concentration. Porter sat at the custom-built mixing console, his hands flying across the knobs and faders. He had an incredible ability to hear every detail of the performance and balance the instruments on the fly. He developed a signature mixing style. He believed in clarity and separation. He wanted every instrument to be heard distinctly. He often placed the bass and drums right in the center of the mix, creating a powerful rhythmic foundation. He would pan the guitars and piano to the sides, creating a wide, spacious sound. And he always made sure that Elvis's vocal was front and center, warm and present. Bill Porter also had a great working relationship with Elvis. He understood how to create the right environment for him. He was the one who controlled the mood lighting, dimming the lights for ballads and brightening them for rockers. He earned Elvis's complete trust. Elvis knew that whatever he sang, Porter would make it sound incredible. His work did not stop when the recording was finished. He would spend hours after the sessions carefully mixing the 3-track tapes down to the final mono and stereo masters. His mixes were clean, powerful, and full of life. They set a new standard for sound quality in popular music. Bill Porter was not just an engineer who pushed buttons. He was a creative partner, an innovator, and the silent architect of the sound that defined an era. Number 4, why did they throw out the recording rulebook? The sessions at RCA Studio B, especially those with Elvis, consistently broke the established rules of studio recording. The standard industry practice at the time was based on efficiency and control. At Studio B, the only rule was to capture the magic, no matter how unconventional the method. This freedom from convention was a key secret to their success. One of the biggest rules they broke was the separation of instruments. In most studios, they would try to isolate each instrument as much as possible using baffles in separate rooms. This was done to prevent the sound of one instrument from bleeding into the microphone of another. This made mixing easier and gave the engineer more control. At Studio B, Bill Porter and Elvis did the opposite. They set the band up in the main room together, often in a circle or a semicircle around Elvis. They used minimal baffling. This meant that the sound from all the instruments and vocals bled into every microphone. The drum mics would pick up the piano, the vocal mic would pick up the bass, and so on. On paper, this was a recording nightmare, but in practice it was genius. This controlled leakage was a huge part of the Studio B sound. It glued the performance together. It made the band sound like they were playing in a real live space. It added to the natural ambiance and richness of the recording. It was a much more organic and cohesive sound than the sterile, pieced together sound of many other studios. Bill Porter was a master at positioning the microphones and the musicians to make this bleed work for him, not against him. Another rule they broke was the idea of a perfect take. In the age of tape, it was possible to edit together the best parts of different takes to create a flawless master. Elvis rarely did this. He was searching for a performance, a complete, emotionally resonant take from beginning to end. He believed that the feeling of a performance was more important than technical perfection. This is why they kept the mistake in "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" It is also why many of his recordings have tiny imperfections if you listen closely. A slightly rushed beat, a voice cracking with emotion, these were not seen as flaws. They were seen as signs of life, of humanity. They prioritized vibe over sterile perfection every time. They also threw out the rule book when it came to instrumentation. If a song needed a specific sound, they would find a way to make it, even if it meant using unconventional objects. They tapped on wooden chairs, shook pill bottles for a shaker sound, and used brooms on the floor for a percussive scrape. Whatever served the song was fair game. This creative, rule-breaking spirit is what made the studio a laboratory for sound, and the results speak for themselves. Number 3, What was the old sound they were trying to escape? When Elvis began recording at RCA Studio B in 1960, he was not just making new music, he was consciously moving away from a sound that had made him famous. The raw, minimalist, echo-drenched rockabilly sound of his Sun Records recordings from the mid-1950s was iconic. But by 1960, both Elvis and the music industry had changed. The goal at Studio B was to create a bigger, more polished, and more versatile sound for a new decade. The Sun sound, crafted by producer Sam Phillips in Memphis, was defined by its limitations. The studio was small, the equipment was basic, and the recordings were essentially live performances captured on a 2-track machine. The signature element was the slapback echo, a quick single repeat echo that gave the records a frantic, energetic feel. It was the sound of youthful rebellion. After his 2 years in the army, Elvis returned as a more mature artist. He was 25 years old. He wanted his music to reflect that. He had been exposed to a wider range of music, including the lush pop of singers like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. He wanted to make records with that kind of sophistication and power, but without losing his own identity. RCA Studio B was the perfect place to do this. It was the home of the emerging Nashville sound, which was all about polish and professionalism. The A-Team musicians were masters of this new style. The technology, like the 3-track recorder and the stairwell echo chamber, allowed for a level of sonic craftsmanship that was impossible at Sun. The new sound they created was a hybrid. It still had the rock and roll energy and the blues and country roots of his early work, but it was presented in a new, high-fidelity package. The slapback echo was replaced with the deep, smooth reverb from the stairwell. The simple guitar, bass, and drums lineup was augmented with piano, saxophones, and lush backing vocals from the Jordanaires. Of songs like Stuck on You and It's Now or Never were the blueprint for this new direction. They were big, bold, and radio-friendly. They appealed not just to teenagers, but to a broader adult audience as well. This was a deliberate commercial strategy, but it was also a reflection of Elvis's own artistic growth. Not everyone loved the change. Some early fans missed the raw, dangerous sound of the Sun years. They felt that the Nashville sound was too smooth, too commercial. But this evolution was necessary. It allowed Elvis to dominate the charts of the early 1960s and cemented his status as a global superstar. The move to Studio B was not just a change of location, it was a conscious and successful escape from the glorious confines of his own past. Number 2, did the famous backup singers even see Elvis when they recorded? The Jordanaires, the vocal quartet that provided the signature backing harmonies on hundreds of Elvis's hits, had a unique and surprisingly separate working relationship with him in the studio. In many sessions at Studio B, they were positioned in their own area, sometimes behind a baffle or in a corner, and they often recorded their parts without even being able to see Elvis clearly. Their connection was almost entirely auditory and intuitive. The group, consisting of Gordon Stoker, Neil Matthews, Hoyt Hawkins, and Ray Walker, was a world-class gospel quartet in their own right. Their ability to create complex, perfect harmonies on the spot was legendary. In the studio, they would gather around a single microphone, usually an RCA 77. This forced them to blend their voices acoustically before the sound even hit the microphone. They had to listen intently to each other to get the balance and pitch just right. When working with Elvis, this process was taken to another level. Elvis would be on his X in the center of the room and the Jordanaires would be off to the side. They would listen to him sing a new song a few times. Then on their own, they would work out a complete harmony arrangement. Gordon Stoker, the group's leader, would typically assign the parts. They would do this quickly and quietly, often with no written music. They had an uncanny ability to know exactly what the song needed. They could create a soaring, angelic choir for a ballad like Surrender, or tight, rhythmic, doo-wop style vocals for a rocker like Stuck on You. Their parts were not just background filler, they were an essential counterpoint to Elvis's lead, a key part of the song's emotional architecture. Because they often could not see him well, they had to rely completely on their ears. They would listen to the nuance in Elvis's voice, his phrasing, his dynamics, his emotion, and tailor their performance to match it perfectly. This intense listening created a deep musical connection that transcended the physical separation in the studio. This method was also a product of the recording technology. By having the Jordanaires on their own microphone, the engineer could control the volume of the backing vocals independently in the mix. It also helped to reduce the bleed of their voices into Elvis's main vocal microphone. This unique working arrangement is a testament to the incredible professionalism and musicality of the Jordanaires. They were not just backup singers, they were arrangers and collaborators. Their ability to create perfect, song-defining harmonies, often without direct visual cues from the star, was one of the most important and least appreciated secrets of the Studio B sessions. Number 1. What was the real secret ingredient in the room? After examining the technology, the people, and the process, the ultimate secret of RCA Studio B was not any single thing. It was not just the Neumann microphone, the out-of-tune piano, or the stairwell echo. The real secret was the intangible chemistry that existed between a specific artist in a specific room with a specific group of musicians and a specific engineer at a specific moment in time. It was an unrepeatable convergence of talent and circumstance. The foundation of this chemistry was Elvis himself. By 1960, he was at the absolute peak of his vocal powers. His voice had matured, gaining richness and range, but he had lost none of his youthful energy. More importantly, he had a clear artistic vision and the confidence to act as the true leader of the sessions. He was the catalyst. His passion, his work ethic, and his eclectic musical taste drove everything. You know, this catalyst was placed in the perfect container, the room itself. The accidental acoustics of Studio B provided a sonic environment that was both clear and warm, a perfect canvas on which to paint. The moody lighting and the late night hours created a private, creative sanctuary, shutting out the outside world and allowing the magic to happen. On that canvas, the Nashville A-team were the master painters. They were not just session players, they were a musical family with a near telepathic level of communication. Their ability to translate Elvis's feelings into musical parts, to build arrangements on the fly, and to play with a blend of precision and soul was unparalleled. They could be a rock and roll band, a pop orchestra, or a gospel choir, changing styles at a moment's notice. The man capturing it all was Bill Porter, the engineer who was the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. His technical brilliance ensured that every ounce of the magic in the room made it onto the tape. He was not just a technician, he was a sonic artist who understood how to use the studio as an instrument. This unique combination of elements created an environment of trust and creative freedom. Elvis trusted the musicians to deliver, the musicians trusted Elvis to lead them, and everyone trusted Bill Porter to make it sound perfect. In this environment, they were free to experiment, to make mistakes, to follow their instincts, and to push the boundaries of popular music. The period from 1960 to the mid-1960s at Studio B was a lightning in a bottle moment. It could not have happened 5 years earlier, and it could not be replicated 5 years later. It was the result of a magical, fleeting alignment of all the right people in all the right places. You know, that chemistry, that feel was the real secret. It is the reason why, more than half a century later, the music made in that simple brick building still sounds so incredibly alive.